Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. I'm going to make a request before we start the content today. Please listen to the entirety of what I say before leaping to knee-jerk comment. I am going to have to use some examples that will describe people who don't look, who aren't representative of a lot of the people who watch this content because it's citing history. Please do not knee-jerk. Please listen to what I have to say in its entirety and really make sure you understand what I am saying, not what you're afraid can be implied by it, before you leave an angry comment railing about some entire group. Because the entire point of what I am going to talk about today is individuals are not neatly representative of these group identities that we keep shoving people into. And part of the problem in gaming and discussions of gaming right now is because the games media claims to be progressive, but they butcher actual progressive theory. And so the stuff that people think this stuff is actually the polar opposite of the theories. Don't believe me? Don't panic. Take a breath. Listen in its entirety. I'll give you some examples, okay? And don't just throw them out because you haven't heard them somewhere else. The whole point here is the theories are not being properly applied. So if you like this sort of content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or one-time Leanna Cares session donations, coffee.com/LeannaK. We need 3 $25 donations every week to keep things at the current level. Okay. We understand when we use an object. Say this is a pencil, right? A pencil can be used to write things. A pencil can be used to tuck behind your ear to possibly hold your hair back, or twisting into your hair to hold your hair in place. Or you can use it to stab somebody in the eye with it, right? Is the negative use, the harmful use, the fault of the pencil? No. The pencil's just a tool, right? Critical frameworks are the same way. Critical frameworks cannot prevent abuse of the framework. They are not the same as, say, binding legal principles where you have to write laws with the awareness that, especially in the structure of the U.S. justice system or the U.S. legal system, a badly written law can be abused and really wreck people's lives. Critical frameworks are just tools for understanding, and they get treated like religions. And like many religions, most people don't read the damn source texts, and they just take what somebody told them, and think that's the reality of the religion. When if you actually go back to the source text, it's not. And one of the big ones for that is the concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality has popped up again because the term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a lawyer and academic who is associated with critical race theory. Again, please do not freak out. When you take these giant buckets of theory and say it's all bad, it's just an emotional response. Theories are just that, theories. Theories are not laws. Now it's but, it's what they're doing with them. Right. And the way to counteract the people who are abusing these theories is to point out how they're getting the theories wrong, not blaming the theories. Because the minute you start going, it's all bad, and people who have read the stuff are like, no, it's not all bad. You seem kind of nuts. Like, that's not saying you are crazy. that's saying that's the reaction. That's the reaction I've been having for about 3 weeks now, talking to people about this stuff, because I'm like, but that's not what the theory says. But that's not what the theory says. But that's not what the theory says. And the response is, but that's how it's being applied. That's how it's being applied. That's how it's being applied. But again, people abuse tools all the time. A hammer can be used to bang in a nail. It can be used to pry things out of things, or it can be used to bash someone's skull in. If somebody uses the hammer as a murder weapon, is that the fault of the hammer? No, it's the fault of the person wielding the hammer. And the best way to combat that is to deal with the people who have bad intent, not ban hammers. We couldn't have a ban hammer if we banned hammers. Da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's where I come at intersectionality and why I'm baffled by the fact that people use the byproducts of the theory to say the theory is bad. But when you actually explain the theory to people, they're like, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But we go back to the hammer and the pencil again, right? Do you get what I'm saying? This is what happens with games and the stigmatization of games and gamers all the time. A couple people do bad shit correlated with a particular game or a particular tradition within games, and games are painted as the problem, not the weird and wacky things that happened in that individual person's brain, right? None of us like that. So I have no idea why people would do the same thing to any other tool or framework. You're just giving the people who want to demonize games more ammunition by normalizing that fallacious thinking. Here's where intersectionalism started. Among other cases, there was a case back in 1976 where 5 black women sued General Motors for a seniority policy that they claimed unfairly affected black women because it was based on seniority and the company didn't hire black women until 1964. So then when there was an early 1970s recession, all the black women got fired because they were new, because they didn't hire black women before that point. Now, if the argument was just, are historical things like that relevant to seniority, or is it just sort of too bad, so sad because a bunch of men got fired too, a bunch of white women and men got fired too? That wasn't the issue at play. The issue at play is that the judge ruled that binding racism and sexism together to create a specific type of discrimination, rather than only suing based on race, only suing based on sex, that would be unworkable. You couldn't target like black women, because the judge ruled against the plaintiffs, saying that black women could not be considered a separate protected class within the law, or else it would risk opening a Pandora's box of minorities who would demand to be heard in the law. Like, I went on about Title VII and all of this stuff. The prospect of the creation of new classes of protected minorities governed only by the mathematical principles of permutation and combination. That's what they called it. What? This is where law has to be very, very precise in its wording. Because it's, are you intending the letter of the law, or are you intending the spirit of the law? What the judge here says sounds nuts, right? If there are particular combinations of things that cause people unique discrimination, well, you would think that would be relevant in discrimination suits, and we should be able to cite reality. And most people agree that, for instance, this is just one example. Don't freak out and make it like I'm saying it's the only example. Black women experience racism differently than black men, and experience sexism differently than white women. What? Yeah, it's complicated, right? Basically, there are different stereotypes about black women than there are about white women. And there are different stereotypes about black men and black women. We know this to be true, right? Now, I'm like, man, if you're a ginger, you get the, oh, you're angry the minute you get excited about something too. So I know firsthand how friggin' frustrating that is, but we don't get the, you're lazy, you're this, you're that, like black women do, right? That alone is frustrating. Oh, you're redheaded, you're fiery. Like, fuck off, man. That just, no, there's actually no real correlation to that. You know why we have to be fiery? Because we get annoyed by comments like that all the time. Just ridiculous. The problem is that somebody had to point out this truism. But you have to do it in academic gobbledygook jargon, you know, in order to get any movement on things. Because the law is its own form of jargon too. Like having to read some of these bills and things like that, my eyes cross. But I want to read the original bills because to me, there is a different way to combat a badly written law versus combating a law that's actually quite cleverly written, but the intent behind it is just evil. Because a badly written law will get thrown out by courts, right? That's the system of checks and balances. But a law that could actually stand up to a constitutional or human rights challenges that is just, you know, that's why the D&D alignment is lawful evil. You have to win hearts and minds there. You can't just throw out the law. Now, ideally, it's a combination of both. Jumping back to gaming, it's the same thing here. We have these real problems in gaming where people just assume that because someone's a white male, they have it made. They don't factor in socioeconomic status. They don't factor in disability. They don't factor in, I mean, disability is a big one that tends to just get left on the floor. They don't necessarily even factor in things like nationality in these debates. Why should nationality matter? Well, you know, do people think that white men in Ukraine are terribly privileged right now compared to, say, white men in America? No. Right? I saw a lot of things, a lot of clashes in gaming that came from people in, you know, former Soviet bloc countries having a real, understandably bad opinion of anything that reeked of communism. And I totally get that because them and their parents lived under communism and they don't want that back. So anything that's like, hey, some of these things weren't that bad. You know, Marx had a good idea. Nope. Right? When you take actual people, right, and say something like, you know, Ivanka Trump versus some regular rank and file dude working an assembly line or a farm in Kentucky who has more social power, you're going to say Ivanka Trump, right? She's got money, she's got connections, she's got all this stuff, you know. Pick a progressive, right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez versus some dreamer kid who happens to be male. You know, okay, he's Latino, she's Latina. Allegedly, because she's a woman, she would be more marginalized, she would be more oppressed. But clearly she's not. She's in the halls of power. She's a legislator, right? That's what intersectionalism is supposed to get us thinking about. That you cannot easily separate gender and race and class and disability and nationality and, you know, a whole bunch of other stuff, transgender status, so on and so forth. I mean, there's another example when you start drilling down on that. You can't weight who has more or less problems, whose problems are worse or better. You have to take the individual issues. You know, the issues a trans man has and the issues a trans woman has depend heavily on a lot of other factors, right? And they're not the same. So, they have transgender status, but then you get into, you know, the erasure of trans men from a lot of dialogues. But then you get, you know, trans misogyny, which is an interconnection of transgender status and then just the shit that comes with being a woman. And they see that in a lot of things. More and more information is coming out that lesbian women are more likely to be victims of domestic violence than straight women or women in relationships with men. The numbers bounce up and down on that, but I mean, that's an important statistic if we can verify it once and for all. When we see these examples, we're like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. And then the minute I say the words progressive stack, everybody goes crazy. I still find it really interesting that the whole concept of the progressive stack got the legs it did. I understand the idea of it. I find the idea kind of ridiculous and possibly counterproductive because some people, because of their own relationships with, you know, race and gender, and might, you know, this idea that, women speak before men, minorities speak before white people, so on and so forth. Why don't you just provide enough time so that everybody gets a turn to talk? You know, when the concept of intersectionality was founded, it wasn't, and Kimberly Crenshaw herself says this, the woman who came up with the term, the lawyer, that it's not intended to just flip systems of oppression so white straight cisgender men end up at the bottom. It's designed to eliminate these systems. Now, you know, eventually in a perfect world, but it's not intended to just invert the triangle. That's nuts. And yet, that's how certain people use it. Now, getting back to gaming. If we actually apply the interlocking challenges that individual people have, you know, and you think about this idea that people have to declare individual disabilities to count, you know, invisible disabilities and invisible losses of privilege. Like, what? People have to out themselves as gay in order to get further ahead in line? That's wrong-headed, right? What we should be doing instead is recognizing, especially on the internet, that there's a lot of things that people aren't declaring. And that's their choice. And one should say, well, if they're not going to declare that, no. The whole idea is that everybody's opinions are treated as equal. Not other people's opinions are given more weight than others because reasons. No, that's not the end goal. It's everybody's opinions are treated as equal. There are going to be disagreements on how we get there because, just look no further than the games press. The gaming press is still not representative of the population in the countries they operate. And I don't know where they get off lecturing other people on this stuff until they get their own house in order that way. There's still way too many, white guys from the Bay Area in games journalism. Now, part of that is because a lot of stuff is still concentrated in the Bay Area, even though gaming is an international thing. GDC's in the Bay Area. It's not central in the US. It's not in an airport hub. It's in the blinking Bay Area. So that's where all the companies go, Though that's changing too. They're moving to right to work states to union bust. Now, do those guys, right? Those particular white guys, can they shout down women and minorities and women who are minorities and all that stuff? Yeah, I have many experiences with those guys who lecture everybody else, just not giving me the time of day and pulling an "isn't that cute, you're trying." They gatekeep. They gatekeep badly. And that's just a fact. And I'm glad they got better healthcare for trans people in the Kotaku union thing. I'm very happy about that, but that doesn't change the fact that there are still voices being left out of games journalism, and there's now that they have to give 3% pay increases every year, they're going to be a lot less likely to hire full-time people. It's all going to be freelance because, well, once they're in, then they have rights, and we don't want that. Our business model's way too volatile, right? But getting back to individual gamers, there was this interesting moment where I was talking to somebody about Horizon Forbidden West and the whole thing about Aloy, all these guys throwing themselves at her, and there's never an opportunity to take these guys up on it. I was talking to a guy who's a, white, straight, cisgender male, and he said, well, yeah, I agree with you. I think it should just be Aloy's choices, and if guys, or we should be able to take these guys up on it. I don't care if somebody thinks that's gay. And I was like, what? He was suggesting that the reason you can't sleep with the various guys throwing themselves at Aloy is because the presumed male player won't want that. And that didn't cross my mind for a second. And I realize that probably does go into the decision makings of a lot of these companies because they still do give preferential treatment to white, straight, cisgender male players. Now, I know a bunch of you gamers are sitting here going, that's fucking stupid. I wouldn't care if I don't want to do it. I just won't do it. Because, I said to the guy I was talking to, I would just, in that position, think, wouldn't it be wish fulfillment that the male player would pick the guy most like them? Because then, that proxy within the game gets to sleep with Aloy. And the guy said, that's what I'd do. But this is why I'm saying that looking at interlocking marginalization will actually make gaming better. Because the average guy that plays games isn't a guy who can get any woman he wants, right? And most people don't necessarily insist that a third person character be like them. If that were true shit, if third person characters needed to look like the people who play them, Horizon Forbidden West wouldn't sell, because I don't see many people who look like me and I look like Aloy, right? It just puts the lie to so much shit about all these assumptions. But then you get into the, white straight cisgender males are not all created on the same playing field either, and I think that's why, stuff that has more diversity within these subsets, like, hey, put in some disabled characters here and there so people can see themselves in them. I'm watching Arcane for the first time. I know I'm behind, and I relate to a lot of the male characters a lot more than I relate to the female characters. Why? Because of other things about them. And you're not allowed to do that in gaming right now because everything is based on how you look instead of other things connected to the characters. So, one character I connected with very early on was Echo, and that sort of stayed. But oh no, you're appropriating blackness if you just happen to go, okay, I see myself in that character. That's absurd, right? Same thing that, I really connect to Victor in that show. Well, he's a male. But hey, I know what it's like to have physical disabilities and have an autoimmune disease. So yeah, I see you, man. Am I forced to like Vi because she looks like me or looks most like me? That defeats the entire purpose of interactivity. That defeats the entire purpose of being able to step into other people's shoes and understand them from the inside through an interactive experience where you get to make choices and walk a mile in their digital shoes, right? And that's what intersectionality tells us. Don't separate people into race and gender and this and that. There are interlocking things that make up people. And so, a woman and a man might see some things the same way because they're both, say, on the autism spectrum and have a physical disability. Just as an example there. They have more things in common than they have separating them, and that matters. And are you seriously going to tell me that an able-bodied white woman needs preferential status in spaces compared to a man who has physical disabilities that may affect his ability to see or communicate? Are you actually telling me that a white woman needs the help there simply because she's a woman? That sounds absurd. That's what intersectionality says. Now, the goal here is to make sure we are actually leveling the playing field and not just shuffling the line, right? Which is what the progressive stack does. That has a heavy, heavy degree of subjectivity. It has a heavy degree of trial and error. But I have seen it work better in gaming communities than anywhere else I have attempted to create inclusive communities. The Twitch chatters, there's people from all over the world and all different backgrounds, gay, straight, trans, cis, all in between, non-binary, all that stuff. And everybody's just cool because everybody's just a gamer and everybody treats each other like a human being. And gaming communities are great for that because we have the shared identity of gamer. And that's a powerful thing that keeps getting stomped on because people freak out with these terms. The truth is that the gaming community on its own has become a real example of intersectionality, recognizing that different people have different challenges, and we're all gamers here, so we're going to help each other with those different things and maybe learn from each other, and it's the development and media sides of the industry that are still so incredibly toxic in that way, not the Dark Souls community. Like, yeah, that weird aberration into the X-Bro era gave all of us a bad name, but if you look at the whole history of gaming, that's the exception as opposed to the rule. You get into more Japanese communities and you got a real diversity of people. It's just that Western marketing driven, Madden Call of Duty crowd. And interestingly enough, League of Legends was so toxic for a while for really no good reason. And they did a lot to clean up their community. That was a weird one. That was an example of nothing in the content. It was this candy colored, pseudo Japanese avatar, like Champions MOBA thing. And it got ridiculously toxic. It's not like the game itself exuded toxic masculinity. There was a little goth chick with a teddy bear that was a launch character, and so that just shows that a lot of these things are structural. They're not content related. And, meanwhile, look how long it took Overwatch to get a black female character. Way too long, And I do think that hurt them not because I think there's a ton of people necessarily chomping at the bit to play a black woman in Overwatch. To me, when there's a glaring omission like that, it just shows a limitation of vision. There's a lack of creativity there. That, why didn't they do that? Well, something about the pipeline was limiting what kind of characters came out of it. It's Blizzard, it's we saw what happened there. But yeah, I do think, and that's why I find it so weird that gamers have this knee-jerk reaction to intersectionalism because of how it's been presented. Because what the framework of intersectionalism is working towards is what gamers want. We're just all gamers. Let's just play. Let's not privilege one group of people for the others. Let's all be equal. Of course, this is because the developers, to some extent, the hypocrisy among developers, Naughty Dog taking this is a game about strong women stance after, everybody knows Amy Hennig was run out of that company. Like, fucking come on, man. Practice what you preach. And that's what's so frustrating being a woman in game dev is a lot of these companies do not practice what they preach. And I've talked about that at length. I'm over time anyway. I won't bore you on that. But it's that, and it's the press that keeps misrepresenting what these things are because they're gatekeeping. They're using these words to consolidate existing power structures instead of eliminating them, right? If all these white dudes in the games media pretend to be great allies of women and minorities, well, they keep their privileged position. They don't have to promote anybody because they're saying the right things. Nobody's watching what they're doing. That's absolutely not what these things were intended to do. And groups like Feminist Frequency prop them up because, well, they want press from these guys, so they don't call them out on this stuff. They attack rank and file gamers who have internalized the message of intersectionality. They just don't know it. And that's why I actually think if we push back on these bad uses of intersectionality, like the absolute ridiculous progressive stack. Because again, you don't have to decide who talks first if everybody has the time and space to talk. That's eliminating the hierarchy, not just shuffling it. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But you're not going to get that from the people invested in the hierarchy. And the amazing thing about gamers, I have never seen a group of people less invested in identity-based hierarchy. They just want to be able to talk about games with somebody. And, you know, are you halfway decent at it? You don't even have to be the best player in the world. That was my big concern about getting into, from software games in a really public way. I thought people were going to make fun of me for sucking, but the exact opposite was true. It's one of the most supportive gaming sub-communities I've ever been a part of, because we all suck. It's a hard game. You know, it's the shared experience of, oh man, that double monkey boss in Sekiro, you know, stuff like that. Totally, not the stereotype. And there are reasons for that. Because people are not blocks of identity. People are interlocking things, systems, and so on and so forth. So hopefully you find this informative. I'm sure there will be the knee-jerk comments, but you've been warned about knee-jerk commenting. I'm just going to ignore those because I asked you not to do it. So help support this channel. If you like this sort of thing, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. And one-time Leanna Cares, sessions, donations, coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching.